back into this for the next half of the hands. So now here, this hand actually got something pretty good, which is nice. We have ace king suited on the button. If you've been following Will's lectures, you would know that this is raised. It folds the big blind, and he calls. The flop here is fairly mediocre. Basically, our hand isn't very vulnerable against the hands that we're beating. Like, there's some hands that it would be vulnerable against. Like, say he has 9-8 of spades. Now he can hit, a 9 and 8 or a spade. There are lots of ways that he could. There are lots of ways he could win the pot. But the problem is, if we do bet there, he'll usually be check raising us, and that allows him to take the initiative with the hands that win against us a lot, that are currently behind us, and means that he'll likely be winning the pot. By checking here, we basically we're going to keep in a lot of the hands that we really beat. Like, say something that he has ace 9 or king 9 or something like that. It has a very small or something like 8-7. They have like a very small % chance of beating us, and there aren't that many boards where we're going to need to fold on. And also, as Will discussed in an earlier lecture, you don't really need, when you have a hand where they're going to be calling with all better hands, folding all worse hands, there's not that much incentive to be betting. I'd usually be betting this board if I was intending to bet to bluff him on a couple more streets, since he's usually, if he's calling, is usually going to have like a jack or a 6 or something like that. And there's not that much need to do that, especially since if the turn is a king or an ace, some of the cards that improve our hand, we're not going to win that big of a pot. Like, if the turn comes a king, even though we have the best card, the best kicker, he can still easily have a straight or 2 pair. And it looks fairly strong, so it's not as if we're going to be winning a huge pot there that often. So we the turn is a jack, and he bets into us for half the pot. This jack it's not that bad of a card. Basically means on this board that there's less combinations of jacks you could have than there would be on the flop. Most of the time when he bets here, I think our hand is going to be I think we're going to be good. Have the best hand and be destroying about half the time, and then be beaten but still have an average maybe 25% chance to win the other half of the time. And also, depending on how much he bets on the turn and river, we can elect as to whether or not we should be calling the river or not. A lot of the hands that he's most likely to bet here would be hands where he has something like a gut shot in them, like something like ace 10 or a king 9. And those are hands where he's very likely to overestimate how well he's doing. Like, if he has a hand like ace 10, he probably anticipates any ace will win the pot for him, and that any king will win the pot for him, so he anticipates he'll have 7 cards to win. As it is, he, against a hand like ace king, if he hits an ace, he'll be losing, and then there's only 3 kings instead of 4, so he only has 3 cards to win instead of 7. So a lot of the hands he's fairly likely to bluff here. He's in a lot worse shape than he would have expected. And then if he does have a pair of something, if he has a 6, we can win with any ace, king, queen, or 6. And if he has a queen, we can ace, king, queen, or 10. If he has a queen, we can win with any ace, king, or 10. So our hand isn't in particularly bad shape, even though it's only ace high. So we call. The river's a 10, which is kind of nice. He bets into us for 8,000 into a pot of 19,000. So here, going back to that concept of polarization, one of the things I said on the earlier slide is the bigger that someone bets, the more polarized they are. So say he were to bet, say he bets 15,000, it'd be quite likely that he would have, a jack or a straight or even a full house a decent amount of the time, but also quite possible he could just have, 5 more spades if he try and get us to make a big fold. When he makes a bet of 8,000 like this, it means that he's usually more in the middle of that range, like something like a queen, or possibly something like ace 10, although I doubt that often. And then if you were to call pre-flop with a hand like kings or aces, I think that would be fairly likely in there. I think it's something like a jack, he would usually bet more, but it could possibly be a weak jack or something like jack 8 or jack 7 or something. So when faced with this action, what this means when he bets smaller is that it gives me more opportunity to bluff raise. Like, if you bet big, I would almost never bluff raise here. Here, I could potentially bluff raise if I think he is on the weaker part of things, and I can also value raise then. Like, if I had king jack here and he bet pretty big, I would just call, since there are lots of hands that could beat me, like 9-8 would beat me, king 9 would beat me, jack 10 would beat me, all that stuff. But when he bets out so small, king jack will almost always be the best hand, and as a result, ace king is basically certainly the best hand. So here I like to raise this, and basically that's one problem you have when you make a smaller bet like he did. good player who's good at reading into that can then, attack that by, by blocking more and by value betting more. So I like to raise, and after I made this raise, I guess maybe he became aware of that fact that maybe he could be getting blocked, and then he was probably like, regretting making that bet sizing, and he called here with Queen 10. The one thing to note about Queen 10, and I'm assuming you guys don't have this problem since you guys are all, some of the smartest people in the country, but this is something just to pay attention when playing against other players. Most people get stubborn when they have hands that are likely to piss them off. And what I mean by that is a hand like Queen 10 here, whether you have Queen 10 or Queen 2, your hand is equivalently strong, but someone's more likely to get pissed off because they feel like 3 pair should be a good hand than if they have a hand like Queen 2. It shouldn't matter at all. And I'm guessing a lot of you guys probably can't even wrap your head around why someone would be dumb enough to think that Queen 10 is any better than Queen 2, but it just happens. People, when they have a hand that they think should be better than it is, he has Queen 10, he's probably more likely to go, 3 pair again, what a waste, I'll just call. Whereas Queen 2, he's much more likely to be all right, Queen 2, that's pretty marginal, I only have a Queen in the 2. They're not looking at what their actual hand strength is now, they're just looking at other dynamics that they're not based on any sort of reason or rational thinking. They're just kind of angry for the sake of being angry. So when he calls her, sorry.
How much did you raise it?
Oh yeah, sorry. My apologies. I'll go back to the previous slide. Yeah, this is just me with the finicky bet sizing. He bet 8,000. I made it 22,222. Yeah, basically, usually I either click, the same button a bunch of times. It'd be a staircase bet, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's just I don't know. There's no real particular reason for that. One thing to know is if you can't see the size up there, it says down here how much I raised, but maybe that's too small of a font to see. So anytime I make weird bet sizing that gets hidden by my cards, I'll explain it in the future. Sorry for that. So yeah, he calls the Queen 10. He was probably just pissed off. Anyways, we got a bunch of the green shirt.
How would you react to the 3-bet?
If I was 3-bet there, even though I said this range is usually polarized, sometimes people just happen to bet small with good hands, and when someone gets 3-bet there, when someone 3-bets there, if I think he's a very, very poor opponent who could never anticipate that I have a hand like Ace-King, who might re-raise something like 9-8 or Ace-Jack, thinking it's the best hand, against an opponent like that, I would call the 3-bet. But most opponents, once they see that raise, they then begin thinking, oh, maybe he's slow play Queen-Queen, maybe he could have, maybe he could river with 10-10. They start thinking about possibly having better hands. Most people only 3-bet for value in that spot, since they don't expect me to be bluffing that often. So I would say basically, okay, if he expects me to have either a value bet or a bluff, when he makes that smaller bet size, I don't anticipate him to be bluffing very often. So the only reason I would ever expect him to be re-raising me is if he had a bluff that couldn't beat my bluffs. But since he made that smaller size, if he thought that I had a weaker hand, he would usually just be calling. So what that means is, as far as partitioning the parts of his ranges, he would usually only be re-raising there if he thinks he can beat my value bets, since I didn't think he would be bluffing that much initially in the first place. So as a result of that, I would only be calling with 3-bet if I think he's the type of opponent who's so weak that he could accidentally be raising a better hand. So typically I would be folding. I have more questions for Fraser.
On the other side, you're on the other side of this, and you're playing an experienced player. Do you ever bluff value bets so that they can't polarize your hand?
Yeah, there are definitely situations where you need to. So explain that one.
Well, you have a really good hand, or a really bad hand.
Yeah.
Then you bet medium, so that from their side, if you have a really good hand, instead of betting a lot, you bet some medium size. They're like, oh, he has a mediocre hand. I'm going to bet more, not call.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that a lot of players do, because basically when and it's something that works out quite well. A lot of players, they poker's all about making assumptions about the range of hands your opponent could have. So if you make a slightly smaller bet or slightly larger bet than you normally would, they can throw your opponent off over the course of the hand. That compounds, and say if you think it's good to bet 60% on the flop, if you just bet 30% and you think it will completely throw them off the rest of the hand, that often will be a valuable thing to do, because they can then make so many mistakes throughout the later parts of the hand. So yeah, that's definitely something that is good to do, and especially if you know what types of assumptions your opponent is likely making That's like, yeah, a very good exploitative approach to be taking if you can anticipate how they will react. Were there any more questions? Alright, okay. Yeah, purple.
How would you react to all in on the turn?
Yeah, if he had just gone all in on the turn, I would just fold it. If we go back to that, so here he would have had like 70,000. Oh, sorry, actually, on the turn. Yeah, the turn, there was only 10,000 in the pot, and he would have 75,000. If he went all in, I would be folding here, like, very happily. I would say I'd be folding, I'd probably be folding any king for sure. I'd usually be folding pocket aces or pocket kings. If I were to see that all in for 7 or 8 times the pot, I'd be calling it if I had a full house. I'd be calling it if I had a good jack, but even a middle jack like Jack 10, it's just such a big bet, it's fairly scary, since there's not that much reason for him to be doing that. Another thing, this goes into the bet sizing thing. This is, not that relevant to this course, but it's something that's worth noting in case online poker comes back in the States. One thing a lot of people do is they like making it seem as if they clicked the wrong button. So say here he had 71,000. Often a common bet size for him would be to bet something like 6666. But a lot of people, when you're betting such big numbers, they typo and they'll bet 66666. So then that would be betting 66,000 at 9,000. A lot of players like to fake that they're doing that. So if someone bets 66,000 here, it's often like you get into like a mental mind game thinking, did he click the wrong number of buttons? Or is he intentionally clicking the wrong number of buttons to make you think that's what he's doing? And this is, so then you get into situations where you just kind of need to guess there. And that's far from like a game theory optimal approach to the game, but it's something that's still, you need to be thinking about those things. If you were to bet something like 66666, if I had any jack, I'd probably just hope that he just bet the wrong one and get all in. Then be real angry when he has a full house or something. So yeah, anyways, and then as far as him going all in on the river, by the river, he has 68,000 and there's 20,000 in the pot. I would say if he went all in, I would likely call, but I wouldn't be that happy about calling. This is a spot where, like, I mean, he could just be betting a worse straight, like something like King 9. He might think is good almost all the time to be trying to get me to call with a Jack or a Queen or something. And there aren't that many full houses he can have, or that many 4 of a kind. So I would call the all in on the river against most opponents. But against most opponents who say I respect, like say I was playing against Will, and Will went all in on this river, I would anticipate that Will would think that I'd be aware that I have a good hand a decent amount of the time, and as a result, he wouldn't be overvaluing a hand like King 9 or Ace Jack or something, and then as a result that I might fold to Will. And I'm not just setting up a future image for next time we play against each other. But basically, against most opponents, they might just overvalue hands, so I think you would call me on it. Alright, on to next hand. This next hand, it folds around to the guy in the small blind with Yadigo, and he min raises to 4,000 at 1,000 and 2,000. I've Queen 8 offsuit in the big blind, and I'm hitting 4-1 odds, and I'm in position. This is the spot where I can be playing a very large number of hands. I'll be like last to act for the whole hand. He can have a very wide range of hands here, and I'm just getting such a good price. I think it's fine to play 75% of hands in this spot, like a very huge percentage of hands can be played. Queen 8 offsuit is definitely one of them. The flop comes Queen Jack 8 with 2 diamonds, which is quite good for me. Here he checks, and what happens is there are certain boards, like as I mentioned earlier, that Ace 8-2 with 2 club board, where the pre-flop aggressor has a big advantage, and the other player is fairly unlikely to have a good hand. And on those boards, you can basically always bet. On a more coordinated board like this, where basically anytime I have a Queen and Jack, I have a pair, obviously. Anytime I have a 10 or a 9, I'll have at least a gut shot, and especially when I'm playing somewhat coordinated hands, I'm likely to have something extra to go along with it, like I might have, backdoor flush shots, like 2 spades or 1 diamond in my hand. Basically, most hands on this board I'll have something fairly decent. So what that means is on a board like this, it becomes fine for the pre-flop aggressor not to just, bet with all of his hands. It becomes fine for him to check fold a lot of his bad hands. And a bad hand, it could be something like, 5-4 suited that's just useless. Or it could even be something like, say he even has a hand like pocket 7s on this board. Pocket 7s will be technically the best hand right now, a decent percentage of the time, because I won't have Queen and Jack or 8 that often. But say he has pocket 7s, and I have a hand like King 9. it's going to be very difficult for him to win the pot since I can hit, a king, a 10, or a 9 to make a better hand than him, and also I can potentially bluff him on other boards by representing that I have something decent. So the hand that's, even if it's okay right now, but it's not that likely to improve to a better hand, he still is in fairly rough shape. So when he checks this board, I bet a little bit over half the pot. Basically, on the more coordinated the board is, the less inclined you should be to slow play. Like say I had we can have like queen 9 or queen 8, or if I had like 10-9 for straight. There's some boards where people might like to slow play if they have 2 pair or straight or something like that. On this board, if the board comes at jack, a 10, a 9, or a diamond, my hand is like kind of crushed, and that's about 40% of the deck right there. And then there are also cards like an ace or a king. Those aren't very great. Like the only cards that are really good for me are a queen, an 8, or a 7. 2 through 7 is not a diamond. So that's only about 40 to 50% of the deck that is good for me. So I really just need to put money in right now while my hand is still in pretty good shape. And now my opponent check raises me. There's some boards where you expect check raises a decent amount. In this spot, usually when an opponent's checking, you expect him to be check calling or check folding most of the time. When he check raises, I need to try to break down what types of hands I think he'd be interested in check raising with. So I'm going to try to dissect the check raise. The way I'm going to break up the parts of his range would be to sort by what I think his second best option would be. So let's just say he decides to check raise instead of check fold. I think that if someone decides to check raise when otherwise they might have check folded, they're often going to have a hand where they have a draw that they didn't think was strong enough to check call. So a hand like king 9 or ace 9 of spades. King 9 would be a gut shot and an overcard. Ace 9 of spades would be a slightly worse gut shot and an overcard and also a backdoor flush draw. So hands like that, someone might decide, they check, planning on check folding, and they see that I bet, and then just get angry and decide to raise since they think their hand's not that bad. You can have some hands like that. If he decided to check raise when the next best alternative is to bet the flop, it's fairly likely that he has a hand where he really wants to bloat the pot. And the reason you would want to bloat the pot is similar to what I was saying about how with queen 8, there are lots of turn cards that are bad for my hand. He may realize that there's lots of turn cards that are bad for his hand, and then try getting as much money as he can in on the flop. So if you get a hand that was like king, queen, or better, he's likely to do this. So that could be, like any 2-pair hand is straight, top pair, good kicker, or better. Or it could also be strong draws, like queen 9 of diamonds, which would be top pair, a gut shot, and a flush draw. Ace 10 of diamonds, which would be a double gut shot and a nut flush draw. But I think hands like that are fairly likely to be check raising. So basically, there will be a handful of strong hands that have to be destroyed, and against his weaker hands, like something like king 9, I won't win that much from them. Basically, if I call and then try to evaluate how things go on various turn cards, some turn cards I'll be destroying his range, some turn cards I'll be in very rough shape, and I can just evaluate based on how he plays and what his bet size would be. So I call check raise. Now there's about 33,000 in the pot, and he bets 13,358. So I mentioned that this turn card changes the board quite a bit. I'm going to look at what hands get changed by this turn card. A hand like king queen on the flop would have been top pair, good kicker, but it would have been quite a strong hand in his shoes. Now that there's an ace out there, either of us could easily have an ace, and a hand like king queen becomes much weaker. A hand like ace 10 or ace 9 could have been like sort of a weaker middle semi-bluff on the flop, but now becomes a stronger hand. He doesn't know that my hand's as strong as queen 8. He often probably anticipates that I would just have something like jack 10 or queen 10 or king queen or something like that. So ace 10 or ace 9 become quite a bit stronger. I think a bluff like king 9 or something like 10-7 or something is very likely to continue. I think some of his bluffs he would have just checked to give up on the turn, but since the ace changes things so much, I think he will continue betting with most of his bluffs. And the other big point, especially when I don't have a king or a 10, is that king 10 went from being a hand that's worse than mine to being the best possible hand, which is a monster. So king, those are some of the big changes that happen here. So if you look, his bet is only 35% of the pot, and what I would say if you bet 60-70% of the pot, this would be a bet that kind of polarizes his range, as I was talking about. A bet like 35% sort of depolarizes his range. It looks like he's not trying to get the pot size to be that big. So a hand like king 10 or ace queen that would be very strong I think he's less likely to have. And also a hand that's very weak, like king 9, where you want to bluff, I think he's less likely to have. I would say a hand like ace 10 becomes much more likely. So I just call here. I think it's a spot where my hand is usually good, but I'll be able to judge very well in the river what decision I should make based on the action that he takes. The river's the least threatening card possible at 2, and he checks to me. When he checks here, my hand is almost always best. I think he would have continued betting if he had something quite good. And the flush draw misses here, so I think I can value bet a lot of hands here. I like to bet 25,555, and which is just about 40% of the pot. And if I had ace 10 or better here, I would be betting. If I had slightly worse, like if I had say pocket kings, or if I had something like ace 6 of diamonds, I think there are definitely, I'm starting in a spot where I don't expect to get called by too many hands, so I would like to just check. But with a hand like ace 10 or better, I'd be betting. And then with bluffs I could get here with, I would make a judgment call, sometimes bluff, sometimes not. I think he usually has something decent, so I wouldn't want to bluff too often. And he calls. Now here he calls with king jack, which is quite a marginal hand, but the main point is just that when I'm only bluffing if I have king high or worse, and only value betting if I have ace 10 or better, it doesn't really matter whether he has, ace 9 or pocket 3s. His hand will end up being similarly strong either way. I don't think his call's particularly good here, but I'm just saying that his hand is effectively as good a call as if he had called ace 9. Now we get to an opponent. Now we get to a much later stage of the tournament, and we're going to discuss how to react to a very aggressive opponent. At this stage of the tournament, there's 12 players left, and when you get far in tournaments, most people they're just really scared. Like a lot of people, they play a very small percentage of hands. They're just waiting for a very strong holding, and I'm sure people have noticed this just playing even in like the home game league, where basically the early stages people are a lot more reckless, and once they get down to the final 5 or 10 players, a lot of players they wait until they get a very good hand, and then those are the hands they're willing to go all in with. At this stage of the tournament, it was basically this player Anjay and me were the only 2 aggressive players, and I'm going to try to go through this hand as like an illustration of how to attack someone who is an aggressive player deep in a tournament. Here the blinds are 15,000 and 30,000. He raises to 61,000. I'm in the big blind getting a little over 4 to 1 odds. Getting a little over 4 to 1 odds, and I call his raise. Oh, sorry about that. I believe my chip stack was, let me go to the next slide. Okay, my chip stack was 970,000. So here I have about 32 big blinds, and I think average stack would have been about 23 or 25 big blinds at that point. So I think he was maybe second out of 12, I was fourth out of 12 or something like that. So I'm gonna go over some strategies to combat aggressive opponents late in tournaments. The simplest is just be aggressive in the pots that he's not in. Like when everyone else is just being overly cautious, you should just learn from the other aggressive opponents at your table. If they're just winning a lot of pots with no risk, you should just do the same. Like just sort of take turns winning pots. That's the simplest thing. But occasionally, you're going to get a decent enough hand that you need to fight back against that opponent. Like you can't let them win every single pot. There's spots where the aggressive players will inevitably end up in confrontations, and I'm just going to discuss how things change when you're butting heads with a really aggressive player. So basically, pre-flop, you should be willing to play more hands against them. If someone was one of those extremely tight players and they raised my big blind, I would say that my king 9 is likely to be in very rough shape. But a player like that, Anjay, could have very weak holdings, so king 9 figures to be the best hand a decent amount of the time. And the main point that this example is going to illustrate is that the weaker your hand is pre-flop, the weaker it's going to be post-flop on average, and that weaker hands connect with a lower percentage of boards. So as I discussed earlier, the more marginal hands you have in your pre-flop range, the more bluffs you're going to have in your post-flop range. The flop comes queen 10 8 rainbow, and as I've talked about, this is a fairly coordinated board that if he's playing only high quality hands, he's fairly likely to hit on this board. He bets 74,000 at 160,000, and now I'm just deciding what to do. And I'm just trying to, I just decide to dissect his pre-flop range. This is going to be a fair bit of talking, but I'm just gonna go into it because it's a fairly interesting example. Here I said if If a player is raising 20% of hands, you can look at the line of hands that he's going to call with. That would be any pair, a suited ace 7 or higher, any 2 suited cards 9 or higher, any 2 offsuit cards 10 or higher. On that board, I'm going to say, like, basically I'm going to break his hand and break his range into hands that are okay, hands that suck, and hands that are really good. Against this player playing 20%, the only hands that suck and can't really withstand any aggression are if he has a pocket pair of 2s through 7s or ace 7 suited. Everything else will have, you know, something like at least an overcard and a gut shot or middle pair or something like that. And that equates to 3% of hands. If he's opening 20%, that's 15% of his range. And in this board, I said if he has top pair and a gut shot or better, or 2 pair or better, I'll consider those monsters. That equates to 6.8% of hands, or 34% of his range. Now we're going to go to a player raising 50%. This gets to be a lot wider. Raising a pair of 2s or better, any suited ace, any suited king, any suited queen, jack 5 suited up, 10-6 suited up, 9-6 suited up, basically any 2 suited cards 6 or higher, 6-5 suited, ace 2 off, king 5 off, queen 7 off, jack 7 off, 10-8 off, and 9-8 off. I'm sure you guys have encountered some opponents, like when you play online, who just seem to play most hands. And this would be, even though it looks like some of these things are complete crap, these are still all above average hands, like something like a, you know, queen 2 suited or 9-8 off, those are still above average. And this, against that specific range, if you look through the final bullet, that's a list of all the hands that suck. I'm not going to list them all off, but there's just a whole bunch where it's just undercards or 1 overcard and then undercard, or just hands that are not coordinated. And that equates to 16.9% or 34% of his range. And if you look at the previous example, 15% of his range only sucked. Now if you look at his monsters, he has 12.4% of hands are monsters, or 25% of his range, whereas the other guy had 34% of his range being monsters. So if you compare the ratios between monsters to just shitty hands, we have the first opponent, if he were to have 10 value bets, he would have only 4 bluffs, because he has 2.5 times as many value bets as bluffs. The second opponent, for every 10 value bets, he has 14 bluffs. So comparing these 14 bluffs to 4 bluffs, that means the second opponent, even though the board might look like it hits both players similarly hard before you dissect his range, the second opponent needs to bluff 350% as often, and that's a huge difference. Like poker, it largely comes down to a lot of sort of minute changes where you alter things by a few percent, but when one guy's bluffing 350% as often as another guy, that just means that he's going to have something that can't withstand that much action on the board like this a very high percent of the time. So as a result, this board doesn't hit him nearly as much as it appears. We like to check raise. When we check raise here, most people don't anticipate it to be a bluff. And what that means is if they have something really strong, like if they have queen 10, or if they have jack 9 for a straight or something like that, they'll typically just try to re-raise when you get all the money in, rather than allow like a bad card to come off on the turn and possibly lose action. So when he just calls here, it usually means that he still has something that's not that strong. Like it could be something like as strong as queen jack, but it's often just going to be like pocket 9s, or something that's not as strong but holding. So when I check raise here, I'm still not that scared. Like he's going to have, just as I mentioned, because his pre-flop range is so weak, his post-flop range is going to be so weak. And now at this point, I bet 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of my stack, which is about 720,000. Here I plan on betting the turn and betting almost every river. And here, if you just look at the risk-reward ratio, like let's just assume my hand was complete crap here and I couldn't win the pot in any way, I'm still, the bluff doesn't need to work that high of a percentage of the time. Like for say if you look at my turn bet in isolation, I'm risking 240,000 to win 540,000. So it only needs to work like about 30% of the time to be profitable. And then if I get called, there'll be about a little over $1 million in the pot. I'm risking 480 to win $1 million. So again, that only needs to work about 30% of the time as well. So each of these bluffs in isolation don't need to work that often. And then you couple that with the fact that, you know, as I mentioned, he has a very weak hand a high percentage of the time, and that can hit a jack or a king to give me a fairly strong, well, a jack give me a very strong hand, or a king give me quite a strong hand. It just means that if you take players who play too many hands pre-flop and attack them post-flop, in situations where you easily have a good hand yourself, it puts a ton of pressure on them. So as I mentioned, as I just mentioned earlier, his really strong hands are likely to have re-raised, so his call here on the flop isn't that strong, and then when I bet, he folds. So now we're down to the final 2 players in this tournament. I'm just going to go through a couple of the hands of heads-up play, and then talk. I don't know if any heads-up play has been addressed in this class, but I'll talk about some of the absolute basics. It's really fair. It's I know a fairly like complicated, diverse game, but I'll also talk about how relative hand strengths change versus absolute hand strength. So here we raise with Jack 9 offsuit on the button. Here you'd be raising the vast majority of your hands since there's only one opponent you need to get through and you're in position the whole way. He calls. The flop comes 9-6-4 with 2 clubs and 1 heart. I bet 244,444 at 510,000, and he calls. So now I'm just going to give some very quick notes, just on how things differ between 9-handed versus heads-up play. Like as I mentioned, when you're playing against opponents with very wide ranges, they're going to generally have very weak hands pre-flop. Well, when you get heads up, even a very tight opponent will still usually play maybe 60% of his hands, or some very large percent of his hands. And when you're playing against someone who plays tight, relatively heads up, it's still loose absolutely compared to like a 9-handed table. So basically heads up, no one ever really has anything. So when you get something that's fairly decent, it has a ton of value. Hand values go up substantially. And then in the past, like we'll give many examples where you're at a 9-handed table, the pocket's multi-way, and you might just bet once or twice with a hand like top pair. It's not that great, even though it's a good hand, absolutely, it's not that great of a hand relatively. Heads up, you could have a lot more marginal hands and go for more value, just because the other person will have something even weaker a lot of the time. So now, as far as the hands he could have, I would say if he had a pocket pair of 10s or better pre-flop, he would usually re-raise me. And if he flopped a better hand, like say pocket 4s or 9-6 suited for 2 pair, he usually would be check raising me. Similarly, if he had a big pair like king 9 for a better top pair, he'd like to be check raising as well. So what that means is when he check calls the flop, we almost always bet best. The turn is a king, and similar to that example earlier, where the board came something like 9-8 to 10 king, it's a spot where the king can hit me, but it can't hit him because like there obviously are a small number of hands he could have where it would hit him. Like maybe if he has a king 4 or king 6, or if he decided to call the flop with king queen of hearts or something like that. There are some hands that can have a king, but it's much easier for me to have a king than it is for him. And what we describe this thing as is we describe this as someone's range being capped. And what a capped range means is that it's difficult for you to have a hand above a certain ceiling, and the lower that ceiling is, the larger the number of value bets you can have. And then the larger the number of value bets you can have, the more you can counteract that by having a large number of bluffs. So basically, what that means is when someone has a capped range, you can attack them with a large amount of aggression, whether you have a good hand or a marginal hand, and it puts people in weak spots. So here, if I have about 10-9 or better, I can just continue betting. So like Jack 9 would be sort of in the middle to bottom of that range. And then also if I have something marginal, like say I have something like 7-5, I can continue betting and know that I have ways of winning the pot, like by either him folding or by like hitting a straight or possibly hitting a pair if he has something very weak. So now he calls. I bet, well, as I mentioned, or I forgot to mention, I bet 499,999 at just under $1 million. Now there's $2 million in the pot. And yeah, as I talked about, his range here is capped. And even like each of his calls in isolation could seem okay with a marginal hand, but he can get into a lot of uncomfortable positions if he even though he's getting 3-1 odds in the turn, when I have a worse hand than him, say he calls me with pocket 7s, if I have worse than pocket 7s, I can still bluff him on the river. So even though he's getting 3-1 odds in the turn, and he'll be getting 3-1 odds in the river, if there's $1 million in the pot, he's going to pay 500,000 on the turn and $1 million on the river, and I'll be betting $1.5 million. That means that there'll be $2.5 million in the pot. He'll be calling $1.5 million. So he's not actually getting 3-1 odds. He's only getting 5-3 odds. So instead of needing to be rated 25%, he needs to be rated 37.5%. And then on top of that, with any of the hands I'm betting, I still have some chance of winning against him. So he needs to be writing even higher percentage of the time. So it just means that when you can't have very strong hands, you get in a lot of positions where a person can just kind of like just own you when they're in position. So he calls, and the river's at 5. 5 does complete a handful of hands he could have, namely if he has 9-5 suited, 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited, or 8-7 suited, they all improve. But at the same time, as I mentioned, heads up, even if a handful of hands improve, there's still dozens of hands they could possibly have that didn't improve, since everyone's range is so wide. So here I like to value bet again. He calls with just ace-3. As I mentioned, if I could be bluffing with 10-8, or I could be bluffing with jack-10. There are a handful of hands I could be bluffing with here, but there are just so many hands I could be value betting that even though he is above the worst hands I'd be bluffing with here, it's still, he just puts himself in bad positions by being in a position, and that's something you need to worry about heads up. Now this will just be the final hand here. I raise with 10-8 offsuit, he calls. Flop comes 10-9-4 with a heart and 2 diamonds. He checks, and I bet just under half pot. I bet 300,000 at 680,000, and he makes it 790,000. In this specific spot, I'd say an opponent, he's likely to be check raising with most of his good hands. Like if he has a pair of 10s, I think he's likely to be check raising. If he has a flush draw, I think he's likely to be check raising. And if he has some other hands like a gut shot, like maybe Jack 7 or King Jack, I think he'll is likely to check raise, as well as an open-ended straight draw like Queen Jack or 8-7. So there's a decent number of hands he can have there. And I think there's enough value bets and semi-bluffs that he's not that likely to have too many pure bluffs. Like I think he's rarely just going to check raise ace high for no reason. So I think in this spot, my hands, it's a spot where when he's check raising me with a good hand, he's usually got me beat. Since even though 10-8, like 8 is the middle card, so it might appear as if 10-8 is about an average 10. In reality, if he has 10-2 through 10-5 or something, he's usually folding pre-flop. And if he has something like a bigger 10, he's usually calling. So even if he has a random sample of hands, 10-8 would be about an average 10. If he has a 10, he's probably got me beat 70 or 80%. So it's not as if I'm in that great of shape. So now I'm gonna look at like how we do if we went all in. Here I plugged it into that program PokerScope, which everyone recommended, or which Will recommended to everyone. And basically, 10-8 and ace-10 may look like similar strength hands, but when you still likely to have a hand like Jack-10 or King-10, something like ace-10 wins 60% against that range, and 10-8 wins 40% against that range. I would have typed it out on the screen, but when I typed it out, it was like 5 or 6 lines because there were just so many combinations of flush draws you could have. Just take my word for it, I guess. So 10-8 off doesn't do as well, and since we're not getting that much value by shoving, we're better off calling and trying to evaluate on most turn cards. While I was playing out this hand, I was explaining to my friend, I'll get in on most turns, and then if the turn's something stupid like the Jack of Diamonds, I can just fold. Turn is the Jack of Diamonds, and it was just kind of, it's literally the worst card in the deck. Pretty much every straight draw he would have would now have either a better pair, or it would be a straight, or if he had a flush, or if he had a flush draw, I now wins 0%. Pretty much everything I'm in rough shape, and he makes a bet that seemed that when I have 3 million and there's 2.2 million in the pot, I'm betting 700,000 is a type of bet someone often makes when they have a very strong hand and they're just trying to like milk you in the pot. So here I elected to just fold this hand, and it just shows how in poker, like on the flop, I was in fairly good shape. I was like beaten by some of his strong hands, but at the same time, most of his like semi-bluffs I would get head up, but on that turn, I just don't really beat anything anymore. And it's just an example of how each card can affect the board texture so much and really affect your potential hand equities. I guess Will, do you want to do the outro for this?
Oh no, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can just you can just talk about the last song. Yeah.
Okay, we'll make this slide. The result of it was I ended up winning the tournament. Yeah. But yeah, basically this lecture I know probably moved fairly quick. But basically, post-flop play, it's a lot more diverse than pre-flop play. There's a lot more variables at hand, and there's just many different situations that can come up. I hope that I was able to talk about a decent number of concepts that people are able to learn from, and if anyone has any questions, just